always thought I had married beneath me. That sounds terrible, I know. But it's the truth. When I met Ryan, he was charming, kind, and hardworking. But he was also a high school dropout working long shifts at a local auto shop. Meanwhile, I was finishing my degree, already planning my future with the kind of man I was supposed to be with, someone ambitious, someone educated, someone who belonged in high society. Ryan was never part of that vision, but somehow he wormed his way into my life. Maybe it was his relentless devotion, the way he looked at me like I was the most incredible woman in the world. Maybe it was how he always made me laugh, how he worked tirelessly to give me everything I asked for. But love wasn't enough. Not for me. At first, I told myself it was romantic. How he would come home covered in grease and exhaustion but still pull me close, whispering about how one day he'd build a better life for us. He swore he'd start his own business, maybe even go back to school. I believed him for a while. I let myself imagine a future where he proved me wrong. But as the years passed, nothing changed. I watched my friends marry men with titles, doctors, lawyers, investment bankers, while I sat across from a man whose hands were permanently stained with motor oil. I wanted more. That's when I met Daniel. Daniel was everything Ryan wasn't. He was polished, intelligent, a Harvard graduate with an executive position at one of the biggest financial firms in the city. He wore designer suits, spoke with effortless confidence, and carried himself like a man who owned the world. More importantly, he saw my worth. I won't pretend it was an accident. I pursued him. At first, it was just harmless flirtation, stolen glances, lingering conversations. I told myself I was only playing, but deep down I knew better. I wanted him. And once I had him, I couldn't stop. The way he touched me, the way he made me feel important, like I belonged in his world, it was intoxicating. Ryan never suspected a thing. He still came home with flowers every Friday, still kissed my forehead before leaving for work, still talked about one day. But I had already decided. I wasn't waiting anymore. I told Ryan I was leaving him for Daniel on a Sunday morning, right after he made me breakfast. He stood there, holding a plate of pancakes like an idiot, staring at me as if he hadn't heard me correctly. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Why?" I sighed, already irritated. "Because you're stuck, Ryan. You're never going to be anything more than what you are. And I deserve better." I watched his face fall, and for a moment I felt something close to guilt. But then I reminded myself, this is his fault. He had years to improve himself. Years to prove to me that I had made the right choice. Instead, he wasted them. Daniel and I got married 6 months later. And I was finally living the life I had always wanted. Lavish vacations, high society events, a house that belonged in a magazine. I wore designer clothes, mingled with powerful people, and never had to worry about money. Ryan. He became nothing more than a distant memory. At least that's what I thought. Then one night at a gala I saw him again. I barely recognized him at first. Gone was the scruffy mechanic I had left behind. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, his hair neatly styled, his posture radiating quiet authority. But it was his expression that unsettled me. The way he looked at me with something that wasn't anger or pain. It was amusement. I held onto Daniel's arm a little tighter, letting my diamond bracelet catch the light. I wanted Ryan to see what I had, to see how far I had come. He didn't look impressed. I don't know what possessed me to say it. Maybe it was the champagne, or maybe I just wanted him to know. "My new husband is a Harvard grad and a department head," I said, my voice dripping with satisfaction. "Not like you." Ryan's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. "Well," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "he's unemployed starting tomorrow." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "What?" I laughed, but it sounded hollow. "That's not funny." Ryan shrugged, slipping his hands into his pockets. "I'm not joking." And then, with a final glance at Daniel, who was standing stiff beside me, his face pale, Ryan walked away. I watched him go, my heart pounding, a sick sense of dread creeping into my chest. Something was very, very wrong. Ryan was bluffing. He had to be. But as I stood there, gripping Daniel's arm, watching my ex-husband walk away with that smug confidence, a tiny seed of doubt took root in my mind. I turned to Daniel, expecting him to scoff, to roll his eyes and dismiss it as one of Ryan's desperate attempts to get under our skin. But Daniel's face was pale. "Daniel," I said, squeezing his wrist. "Say something." His jaw tightened. He pulled his arm away and ran a hand through his hair. "Not here," he muttered. "Not here." The gala around us buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, oblivious to the moment that had just shattered my world. I looked around nervously, suddenly feeling like all eyes were on us. They weren't, of course, but my confidence had cracked. We left the gala early. The entire car ride home was suffocating. Daniel stared out the window, his fingers tapping against his knee. A habit I knew meant he was deep in thought, troubled. I sat stiffly beside him, my mind racing. Ryan was nothing. A high school dropout. A mechanic. How could he possibly have any control over Daniel's career? By the time we arrived at our penthouse, I was sick of the silence. "Are you going to tell me what that was about?" Daniel exhaled sharply, then stormed into his home office. I followed. He loosened his tie, pacing behind his desk. I had never seen him so rattled. "Daniel," I snapped. "Talk to me." He turned, his eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. Fear? No. Dread. Finally he spoke. "Ryan owns the company." The words didn't make sense at first. I blinked. "What?" Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "The firm. My firm. The one I work for. Ryan owns it. He's the CEO." I let out a sharp laugh. "That's impossible." But Daniel wasn't laughing. "I don't know how or when," he muttered, shaking his head. "But it's him. I recognized his name a few months ago when the company changed ownership. But I never connected the dots. I never imagined it was him." I sank onto the chair, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. This had to be a joke. Ryan. My Ryan? The man I had left behind, the man I had written off as a dead-end failure? The one who used to come home covered in sweat and grime from fixing cars? That Ryan now owned the firm that my perfect, Harvard-educated husband worked for? No. It wasn't possible. But the look on Daniel's face told me it was. I gripped the armrests. "But you're the department head. He can't just fire you." Daniel scoffed. "Of course he can. He owns the damn company." A chill ran through me. He wasn't bluffing. Ryan had meant what he said. "He's unemployed starting tomorrow." I covered my mouth with my hand, my mind spinning. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. But it was. The life I had built, the perfect life, was about to come crashing down, and the man I had discarded like an old toy was the one holding the wrecking ball. Ryan had played the long game, and I had never seen it coming. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the night's events over and over. Ryan's smirk. Daniel's panic. The cold realization that my ex-husband, the man I had mocked and left behind, had somehow climbed his way to the top without me noticing. How? How had he done it? I tossed and turned, my mind racing. When I left Ryan, he had nothing. A rundown auto shop job. A small apartment. Dreams that never seemed to materialize. And yet, while I was busy crafting my perfect life with Daniel, Ryan had been building his own empire. Without me. The thought made my stomach twist in a way I didn't like. Beside me, Daniel finally fell into restless sleep, but I could hear his shallow breathing, the tension still coiled in his body. He had spent hours on the phone trying to get answers, calling every connection he had in the firm. But the answer was always the same. Ryan was the sole owner now. And if Ryan wanted Daniel gone, he was gone. The realization hit me like a truck. Tomorrow my husband, the man I left Ryan for, the Harvard-educated, high-society, polished professional, would be unemployed. Because of Ryan. Because of me. I got up before the sun rose, wrapped myself in a silk robe, made coffee, and stood by the penthouse window overlooking the city. Normally this view filled me with pride. It was a reminder of how far I had come, of the life I had earned. But this morning, all I saw was the reflection of a woman who had miscalculated everything. Daniel came into the kitchen an hour later, already dressed in his usual tailored suit, except this time, his expression was grim, his posture stiff. "What are you doing?" I asked. He poured himself a coffee, his jaw tight. "Going to work." I blinked. "Daniel. Ryan owns the company. He made it clear what's going to happen." Daniel met my eyes with cold determination. "I built that department from the ground up. I have influence. I have leverage. He can't just." A sharp chime interrupted him. His phone. A single text message. Daniel read it. His grip on the cup tightened. Then, without a word, he slammed it down onto the counter, grabbed his coat and walked out the door. I didn't have to ask what the message said. Ryan had made his move. I waited all morning for Daniel to come back. The silence of the penthouse felt suffocating. By noon I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my coat and left. I didn't know where I was going at first. I just needed air. But my steps had a mind of their own. Before I knew it, I was standing outside a glass skyscraper with a familiar logo stamped on the side. Ryan's company. I had no idea what I was going to say to him. I just knew I had to see him. The receptionist barely looked up as I walked in, too busy typing away at her computer. "I need to speak with Ryan Harmon," I said, lifting my chin. She barely glanced at me. "Do you have an appointment?" "I'm his ex-wife." That made her pause. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and then before she could respond, another voice cut through the air. "Let her through." I turned, and there he was. Ryan, dressed in an expensive tailored suit. Not a speck of grease or oil in sight. He looked nothing like the man I had left behind. But his eyes? Those were the same. Amused. Cold. Calculated. He gestured toward the elevator. "Let's talk." I hesitated. For the first time since last night I realized something terrifying. I wasn't in control of this conversation. Ryan was. And I had no idea what he was going to do next. I followed Ryan into the elevator, my heart pounding in my chest. The doors slid shut with a quiet ding, sealing us inside. For a few seconds there was nothing but silence. Ryan didn't even look at me. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the numbers climb as we ascended to his office. As if I was no more than an afterthought. As if he wasn't the one who had just destroyed my husband's career. I hated how calm he looked. I hated that he had the upper hand. "You've changed," I said finally, breaking the silence. He smirked, still not turning toward me. People do that when they're forced to rebuild their lives from nothing. The words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. The elevator doors opened, and he led me through a sleek modern office space. Floor-to-ceiling windows, leather furniture, an expensive liquor cart in the corner. It was nothing like the cramped apartments we had once shared. It didn't fit the Ryan I used to know. But that was the point, wasn't it? He sat behind a massive desk, gesturing to the chair across from him. I hesitated before lowering myself into it, crossing my legs and keeping my posture poised. I wouldn't let him see that he had rattled me. "All right," he said, leaning back. "Let's hear it." I frowned. "Hear what?" "Your speech." He waved a hand lazily. "The one where you begged me to reconsider. Maybe even throw in a fake apology for good measure." Heat rushed to my face. "I didn't come here to beg." His lips twitched. "No." I clenched my hands into fists. "You've made your point, Ryan. You got your revenge. You took away Daniel's job. What more do you want?" Ryan's smirk faded. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Revenge?" He shook his head. "You really think I did this just to spite you?" I swallowed, suddenly unsure. "Didn't you?" He studied me for a moment before exhaling a quiet laugh. "I bought this company 6 months ago, Ashley. Long before I even knew Daniel worked for me." The floor beneath me felt like it had shifted. 6 months ago? I had thought this was some kind of personal attack, some calculated way to get back at me. But if Ryan had done this before he even realized Daniel was here, then this wasn't about me at all. I gripped the armrests of my chair. Then why fire him? Ryan's expression darkened. "Because he's incompetent." My breath caught. "Excuse me." "He's reckless. He's been making terrible financial decisions for months." I looked into the numbers myself. Ryan leaned back again, folding his arms. If I had let him stay, he would have run this place into the ground. I stared at him, my mind spinning. "You're lying." He raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" I hated the way he looked at me, like he had already won. Like he had known from the moment I walked into this office that I wouldn't be able to fight him on this. Because deep down, I knew he was telling the truth. Daniel had always been reckless. He loved to take risks, push limits. I had admired it once, thinking it was the mark of an ambitious man. But if Ryan was right, if Daniel's arrogance had been jeopardizing the company, Then Ryan hadn't fired him just to punish me. He had fired him because he deserved it. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. You're enjoying this. He smirked. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. Anger flared in my chest. You're still the same petty, small-minded dropout I left behind. I expected him to flinch, to react, to show some sign that my words still had power over him. But Ryan just smiled. A slow, amused smile that sent a chill down my spine. You're wrong, Ashley, he said, standing up and adjusting his cufflinks. I'm not the same at all. I swallowed hard, watching him, feeling an unease I couldn't quite place. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt. He had outgrown me, and that terrified me more than anything else. I left Ryan's office feeling more unsteady than I ever had in my life. I had come here thinking I could talk him down, convince him to undo what he had done to Daniel. I thought this was all some long-awaited act of revenge, a final way to humiliate me after all these years. But I had been wrong. Ryan hadn't fired Daniel because of me. He had fired him because he deserved it. I gripped my coat tighter around me as I stepped outside, the cold wind biting at my skin. My hands were shaking, and I wasn't sure if it was from anger or something worse. Fear. Because for the first time since I had left Ryan, I had to face an uncomfortable truth. I had bet on the wrong man. When I got home, I found Daniel in the living room, pacing back and forth, phone in hand, his face red with frustration. The moment he saw me, he ended his call and turned on me like a storm. Where the hell have you been? I set my purse down on the kitchen counter, keeping my expression neutral. I went to see Ryan. Daniel scoffed. Oh, perfect. And what, you thought you could fix this? I bristled. I thought I could talk to him, get him to reconsider. Daniel let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You still think you can just bat your eyelashes and make things go your way, huh? His words hit me harder than I expected. I squared my shoulders. I was trying to help you, Daniel. He ran a hand through his hair, his breathing uneven. Well, congratulations. It didn't work. I swallowed, glancing at the untouched whiskey glass on the table. The bottle was already half empty. What did he say? Daniel shook his head, his jaw clenched. HR confirmed it. My termination is official. They're revoking all my company shares. Everything. Do you realize what that means, Ashley? Yes, I did. It meant the life we had built, the one I had chosen over the life I had with Ryan, was about to fall apart. I kept my voice steady. We'll figure something out. Daniel laughed again, but this time it was bitter. Oh, will we? What, you think I'm just going to find another executive job overnight? My name is ruined. Ryan didn't just fire me. He humiliated me. Do you know how many people in this industry are already talking about it? I flinched. Because I did know. The corporate world thrived on gossip, and word of Daniel's termination, especially at the hands of a man like Ryan, would spread like wildfire. But Daniel wasn't finished. He played you, he spat. You walked right into his office like a damn fool, thinking he'd listen to you. But this, he gestured wildly around the penthouse, at the designer furniture, the luxury, the life. This is exactly what he wanted to take from you. A lump formed in my throat. Because what if he was right? What if Ryan had been enjoying this, watching me watch my world crumble? I forced myself to take a deep breath. This isn't Ryan's fault, Daniel. His head snapped toward me so fast I thought he might break something. What? I hesitated, but the words were already slipping out. He said you were reckless with your department, that you were making bad decisions, that the numbers didn't add up. Daniel's nostrils flared. You're seriously taking his side? I'm not. You are so predictable. He sneered, stepping closer. The second things get hard, you start looking for a way out. Isn't that what you did to Ryan? His words hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth to fight back, but I had nothing. Because he wasn't wrong. I had left Ryan when things weren't good enough. I had chosen Daniel because he was better. But now I wasn't so sure. Daniel grabbed his coat, his movements sharp and aggressive. I need some air, he muttered, storming toward the door. I should have stopped him. Should have told him not to go. But I didn't. I just stood there, staring at the place where he had been, feeling a sickening weight settle in my stomach. For the first time in my life, I had no idea what to do. Because for the first time, I was losing. Daniel didn't come home that night. I told myself I didn't care. I poured myself a glass of wine, curled up on the couch and turned on the TV, pretending everything was fine. But no matter how many times I flipped through the channels, I couldn't silence the nagging thought in my head. Ryan had destroyed Daniel. But Daniel had never been as invincible as I thought, had he? I stared at my reflection in the darkened TV screen, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. My hair was slightly disheveled, my robe loosely tied. I had always taken pride in my poise, my grace. But right now I looked rattled. I had never prepared for this. Daniel was supposed to be my safety net, my guarantee of success. I had walked away from Ryan without a second thought, confident that I was upgrading my life. And for years I had convinced myself that I had made the right choice. But now I wasn't so sure. Because the man I had deemed less than was sitting in a corner office, untouchable. And the man I had married, the man I had bet my entire future on, had just lost everything. And I had no idea how to fix it. By morning, Daniel still hadn't returned. I woke up in our empty bed, the sheets beside me untouched. Normally I would have been furious. But after last night, after the look in his eyes, the venom in his words, all I felt was exhaustion. I showered, dressed in a silk blouse and tailored pants, and made myself a cup of coffee, just like I did every morning. Because I needed normalcy. I needed control. I picked up my phone, hesitated for a second, then dialed Daniel's number. Straight to voicemail. I clenched my jaw, took a sip of my coffee and tried again. Nothing. My stomach twisted. Where was he? I hated the way my mind raced, the way paranoia clawed at me. Was he at a bar? At a hotel? No. I cut the thought off before it could finish. Daniel wasn't the type to cheat. He was selfish, arrogant and reckless, but he was mine. Still I had to find him. I checked his usual places. His gym. His office, though that was pointless considering he no longer had one. Even the overpriced cigar lounge he liked to visit with colleagues. Nothing. Then as I was leaving the lounge, my phone buzzed with a message from one of my so-called friends. A woman I had known since my early days with Daniel. Someone who thrived on gossip. Saw Daniel at the Grand Marlowe last night. Looked pretty cozy with some brunette. Thought you should know. Kiss mark. My blood ran cold. The Grand Marlowe. A 5-star hotel downtown. I gripped the phone so tightly my nails dug into my palm. Daniel wouldn't. Would he? I hailed a cab, barely able to keep my breathing steady as I gave the driver the address. If Daniel was there with another woman, I would kill him. When I walked into the Grand Marlowe, I knew exactly where to go. Daniel always booked the same suite whenever he had late meetings or wanted to escape from stress. And as I reached the door, I hesitated, my heart slamming against my ribs. I needed to be wrong. I needed him to be alone. I reached up and knocked, my pulse thundering in my ears. Seconds passed. Then the door opened. And there he was. Shirt wrinkled. Tie missing. Whiskey in hand. And just behind him, standing in nothing but a hotel robe, was another woman. A brunette. A younger brunette. Something inside me cracked. Daniel blinked at me. His expression unreadable. Then, as if he hadn't just been caught, he sighed and took a slow sip of his drink. You shouldn't have come here, Ashley. I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Because in that moment, I realized something horrifying. I had spent so many years running from Ryan. So many years convincing myself that Daniel was the better choice. But Daniel had never been my upgrade. He had been my punishment. I had never understood what it meant to be truly speechless. Until now. Daniel stood before me, calm as ever, dressed in a half-unbuttoned shirt with a whiskey glass dangling lazily from his fingers. And behind him, the woman, barely covered by a plush hotel robe, glanced between us with an expression of awkward amusement. I felt sick. I had spent all night worrying, searching, defending him in my mind. I had told myself that no matter how reckless, how cruel, how selfish Daniel could be, he wouldn't do this. But here he was. And the worst part? He wasn't even ashamed. You shouldn't have come here, Ashley, he said smoothly, as if I was the one who had crossed a line. I blinked, my nails digging into my palms. Excuse me. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his forehead like I was a nuisance. I was going to come home later. But now, since you're already here, let's not make a scene. A scene? My body trembled with rage. You're sleeping with another woman, and you think I'm making a scene? Daniel rolled his eyes. Don't act so innocent, Ashley. We both know this marriage was over the second I lost my job. The second he lost his job? I let out a hollow laugh. So that's it? The moment things get hard, you throw me away? You replace me. His gaze darkened. Isn't that what you did to Ryan? The words hit like a slap. Daniel smirked, watching my reaction like a predator who had just landed a fatal blow. Come on, Ashley. Don't act so shocked. You left Ryan the moment you thought you found something better. He tilted his head mockingly. Guess we're more alike than you thought. I couldn't breathe. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. This was karma, wasn't it? The universe balancing the scales, giving me a taste of my own betrayal. But I refused to crumble. I straightened my spine, lifting my chin. Enjoy your new upgrade, Daniel, I spat. But don't expect me to be waiting when she gets bored of you too. I turned on my heel, my heart hammering, my vision blurring as I stormed toward the elevator. I heard Daniel chuckle softly behind me. Don't worry, Ashley, he called out. I won't. The door slid shut. And just like that, my marriage was over. I walked for hours. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't go home. Not yet. I wasn't ready to step back into that penthouse, into the empty life I had built. 'Cause that's what it was, wasn't it? Empty. Daniel had never been my future. He had been my escape. A way to erase Ryan, to pretend I had outgrown him, that I was better than the life I left behind. But Ryan had built something real. Something powerful. And me? I had nothing. A shattered marriage. A ruined reputation. A future I couldn't even picture anymore. And the worst part? Ryan had seen this coming all along. I didn't know what I was doing until I was standing in front of his office again. Ryan's receptionist barely had time to react before I pushed past her, heading straight for his door. I didn't knock. I just walked in. Ryan was sitting behind his desk, flipping through documents, looking as unbothered as ever. He glanced up, and for a moment I saw it, the flicker of recognition, of curiosity. Then he smirked. Back so soon? I clenched my fists. You knew, didn't you? He leaned back in his chair, feigning innocence. Knew what? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Daniel. His smirk deepened. Ah. I hated him in that moment. Hated how calm he was, how right he had been about everything. You could have warned me, I hissed. Ryan chuckled, shaking his head. And why would I do that? I had no answer. Because I didn't deserve one. Because Ryan owed me nothing. And for the first time since I had walked away from him, I realized I had never really left him at all. Ryan didn't look surprised to see me. That was the worst part. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching me like I was nothing more than an amusing inconvenience. Like I wasn't standing in his office, my entire life crumbling around me. I hated that look. I had seen it before years ago when I told him I was leaving. Back then I thought it was defeat. Now I realize what it really was. Indifference. You could have warned me, I repeated, my voice quieter this time. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Warned you about what? That Daniel was a selfish, reckless idiot. He let out a soft laugh. Ashley, you knew exactly what kind of man he was. You just didn't care. I flinched. 'Cause he was right. I had known. I had seen the arrogance, the ruthlessness, the way Daniel cut corners and made impulsive decisions. But I had convinced myself it was ambition. That it was the mark of a man going places. I chose to ignore the warning signs. Just like I had ignored Ryan. I clenched my fists, forcing my voice to stay steady. I thought he was better than you. Ryan's smirk didn't falter. Well, that was your first mistake, wasn't it? I hated how calm he was. How utterly unaffected. I had come here looking for something. I wasn't even sure what. Maybe some acknowledgement that this was personal. That he had taken Daniel down not because it was the right business decision, but because it was about me. But it wasn't. And that made it worse. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the lump in my throat. So what now? Ryan tilted his head. Now. I swallowed. Now that you've won. He let out a soft chuckle. Ashley, this wasn't a game. There was nothing to win. I bit my lip, hating the sting in my chest. Then why did you fire him? Ryan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. His expression turned serious, his voice dropping lower. Because he deserved it. Because he was incompetent. Because I don't run my company based on petty grudges. He paused, his gaze sharp. And if you're standing here thinking this was all about you, then you still don't understand a damn thing. I looked away, my face burning. He was right again. I had spent years thinking I was the center of the universe. That men existed to either serve me or fight over me. That Ryan had spent all these years waiting for a chance to get revenge. But the truth was far worse. He hadn't been thinking about me at all. I was nothing more than an afterthought in the empire he had built. I exhaled shakily. Daniel cheated on me. Ryan didn't even blink. I know. I jerked my head up. You knew. Ryan shrugged. I've known for a while. It wasn't exactly a well-kept secret. My stomach turned. And you didn't think to tell me? Ryan's smirk returned. Why would I? It wasn't my problem. His words stung in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so long seeing Ryan as mine. My past, my mistake, my unfinished chapter. But I wasn't his unfinished business. I was nothing to him. I took a shaky breath, hating the way my chest ached. What happens to me now? Ryan studied me for a moment before answering. I don't know, he said, tilting his head. But I do know this. He leaned in, his voice calm but firm. You're on your own this time. A cold chill ran through me. I had never been alone before. I had left Ryan for Daniel. And now Daniel had replaced me. For the first time in my life, I had nowhere to land. No safety net. No backup plan. Just the cold, hard reality of my own choices. I forced myself to nod, even as the lump in my throat threatened to choke me. I see. Ryan gave me one last unreadable look before glancing at the door. The message was clear. This conversation was over. So I turned around and walked out of his life. Again. But this time, he wouldn't be waiting for me to come back. That I had never been a woman who begged. Not for attention. Not for forgiveness. Not for second chances. But now, sitting in my sister's tiny apartment, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee, I realized that I had nothing left but begging. Begging for a place to stay. Begging for time to figure things out. Begging myself to admit what I had spent years denying. I had destroyed my own life. Emily moved around the kitchen, pretending not to stare at me. I knew she had questions, but she was waiting for me to break. To admit that I had made a mistake. And God, had I. I had chosen a man who looked good on paper but had no foundation. A man who made me feel important, who promised me a life of luxury and prestige, only to throw me away the second his world crumbled. And the man I had thrown away? He had built an empire. He had thrived. He had left me behind. I took a slow sip of coffee, forcing my voice to stay even. I need a job. Emily let out a quiet scoff. You? A job? I swallowed the bitter taste of humiliation. Yes. She sat across from me, arms folded. And what exactly can you do, Ashley? The question stung. Because the truth was I had no real skills. No career. No experience. I had spent my entire adult life molding myself into the perfect wife. First for Ryan, then for Daniel. I had been the woman who hosted charity galas, planned extravagant dinner parties, and made sure our social circle saw me as a polished, refined woman of status. But that status was gone. And no one was hiring a woman whose biggest accomplishment was arranging floral centerpieces at overpriced fundraisers. I'll figure something out, I said quietly. Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. Look, you can stay here for a little while. But you need to be realistic, Ashley. You don't have savings, you don't have property, and I doubt Daniel is going to give you much in the divorce. Divorce. The word settled heavily between us. I had walked into my marriage with Daniel thinking I had one. Now I was leaving it with nothing. I exhaled slowly. I know. For the next few weeks I tried to pull myself together. I sent out resumes for jobs I was underqualified for, networked with people who barely remembered my name, and even humored my mother's suggestion of moving back home. But the world had moved on without me. No one cared about the downfall of Ashley Carter. No one wanted to save me. And that's when I realized Ryan had been right all along. I had spent my whole life believing I could trade up, that I could move from one man to the next, always securing my position, always making sure I was taken care of. But no one was going to take care of me now. Not Daniel. Not Ryan. Not even Emily forever. It was time I faced the reality I had spent years running from. I had to stand on my own. The first time I saw Ryan again was 2 months later. I was working at a mid-tier real estate agency. Not as a realtor but as an assistant. It was humiliating work, filing paperwork and fetching coffee for women who used to envy me. But I swallowed my pride. Because for the first time in my life I wasn't looking for an escape. I was surviving. And then one afternoon I saw him. Ryan walked in, effortlessly confident, dressed in a suit that made him look more powerful than ever. He was speaking to one of the top agents, discussing a commercial property deal. He didn't see me at first. And for a moment I thought about hiding. But no. That's what old Ashley would have done. So I stood a little taller, held my chin a little higher. And when he turned and saw me, his eyes flickered with something unreadable. Surprise? Curiosity? Pity? I refused to let it shake me. I met his gaze, forcing myself to stay composed. Ryan took a slow step forward, studying me. Didn't expect to see you here. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. Didn't expect to be here. He nodded, his expression unreadable. How's life? I hesitated. Then, instead of lying or deflecting, I said the one thing I had never said to him before. The life I chose wasn't the life I needed. Ryan's lips curved slightly. Not in mockery. Not in cruelty. But in understanding. He nodded once. Good. Then he walked away. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't ashamed. I was finally free.